Welcome to The Deepening, a podcast that explores the inner journey and its relationship to our outer life through the lens of Jungian psychology, spirituality, and personal transformation. I'm your host, Suzanne Larue. Let's journey inward together. In this episode, I'm honored to welcome Dr. James Hollis. Dr. Hollis is a Jungian analyst, teacher, and internationally acclaimed author whose work has touched countless lives. Hollis's life's work has been dedicated to helping us find purpose, depth, and authenticity, especially in the second half of life. His many books include The Middle Passage, From Misery to Meaning in Midlife, and A Life of Meaning. In this conversation, we explore the psychological and spiritual tasks of midlife, the recovery of personal authority, and the courage it takes to live in alignment with what is truly ours to express, and how our patterns, dreams, and even our symptoms can guide us there. I'm so pleased to share our conversation with you. Hello, Dr. Hollis. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you.
I am thrilled to be speaking with you today. I've read several of your books and listened to many of your lectures over the years, and your work has really impacted how I think about midlife and what it means to live a meaningful life.
Well, I'm glad that you found something of use there.
You say that larger questions lead to a larger life. So I thought we'd start with a really big one, which is what is meaning? And how do we go about creating a meaningful life?
Well, first of all, meaning is something that requires that we find our personal authority, because just to step back a moment and take a kind of global view, we start off with an internal guidance system. It's called our instincts. But because we're dependent on the circumstances into which we're born, the family, the culture, and so forth, we are obliged to make adaptations. And of course, the more adaptations we make, the greater the possibility of our being separated from our instinctual center. So we tend to lose contact with our own source of innate wisdom to know what's right for us under certain circumstances. And so the real task about meaning is finding one's own personal authority again. By authority, I mean what is true for you really. And I have to add that word really, because there's a lot of traffic going on inside of our heads at all times about this is who you are, this is what you're supposed to be. But if they are also contradictory to what is true for us instinctually speaking, then there's going to be a conflict. So to talk about meaning means, first of all, you have to be able to trust yourself enough to pay attention to that question. And you have to also recognize that if one doesn't, one's going to pay a price of another kind. If what we're living is meaningful to us, it allows us to put up with stress and conflict and even suffering. But, we are fulfilled in doing so. Jung said once, the smallest of things with meaning is always greater than the largest of things without meaning. And if I'm living my life disconnected from what is meaningful to me, there's going to be a whole range of pathological symptoms, somatic disorders, emotional distresses. And underneath that, the question of meaning is not something I decide conceptually, it's something I experience, that this feels right to me in some way. The biggest project of the second half of life, and I'm speaking very loosely here and talking about halves, is the recovery of personal authority. And that means we have to sort through the traffic that we carry every day and discern what speaks to us and what's confirmed by our experience. And then secondly, to attain permission to do this. That sounds simplistic, but I have found most people don't have permission to truly feel what they feel, pursue what they wish to pursue with their lives, follow the pathway of their desire, and to recognize that they are, in the end, solely responsible for discerning what is meaningful and finding the courage to live that in the world. When we get off track with our own internal guidance system, it's going to pathologize. It will show up as boredom, lack of energy for something, somatic disorders, troubling dreams, self-medication. So one of the things we can say is that our psyche is constantly paying attention and it's registering its opinion as to how we're conducting our lives. We've learned to override that a good part of our lives, but frankly, if you keep doing that constantly, the symptoms tend to get worse, as I think we all know.
What strikes me about that answer is this idea that the psyche is always paying attention and kind of monitoring things and giving us feedback. And that meaning isn't something that we figure out, but that it's something that we feel when we're in alignment with our deeper truth. So, how do we go about beginning to reclaim meaning?
Well, you start with your life patterns, particularly focus on those ones that you find troubling to you or seemingly never lead to where you think it will lead, or perhaps even causes harm to you or someone else. Where there is a pattern, there is a core idea, and I have to put idea in quotes there because it may not be conscious to us, but there is a core definition or idea that our patterns are in service to. So, for example, if every time you got near a certain issue in your childhood and you got a shock as a result of that, after a while you just build a life completely avoiding those circumstances, little realizing that that was the kind of pattern that we create for ourselves. Now, patterns can be useful, but many times our patterns over time become kind of shadow governments. We don't think, we react. And our behaviors are logical if you could understand the emotional premise that it's in service to. So, for example, if I recognize, well, I veer around a certain kind of subject matter or I avoid certain kinds of situations, even though there's a price to the adult conduct of my life in so doing, well, there's a reason for that pattern. But what is that reason? And am I able to make it conscious? Can I break that pattern? And, it's very easy in the abstract. In practice, it's very difficult because patterns are, as I said, conditioned reflexes that over time become sort of automatic ways of responding to life, such as avoidance of conflict, or not speaking up when we need to speak up for something, or not feeling entitled to pursue what wants expression through us. Those are patterns we learned early because the child, again, out of its neediness, dependency, vulnerability, etc., is obliged to shut down an area of that person's life, and we become instrumental in our own suppression.
One of the questions you raise in the book is, what are the agencies within me that are making these choices, often unconsciously? And I love how that invites a deeper kind of reflection on what's actually driving our patterns and decisions beneath the surface. Can you speak more about these inner agencies and how we begin to identify them?
That's what a complex is. Now, people hear the word complex and they think of something negative. A complex is simply a cluster of energy that we carry inside of us, whether we're aware of its presence or not. And given the right circumstances or triggering events from outside of us, that energy is triggered, comes up and usurps ego consciousness and takes over, becomes a kind of series of instructions to us, whether we're aware of them or not, such as stay away from this, or don't speak up, or you can't do that. Now, those are the kind of messages we've acquired along life's highway, and they attain a kind of de facto institutional voice within us. And what we do is we recreate our life over and over and over. If, for example, one says, well, all of my relationships turn out the same way, well, guess what? You're the only person present in that long running soap opera you call your life. Maybe it has something to do with what you're enacting, whom you are choosing for friendships. What are the kinds of dynamics you engage in? These are not necessarily conscious thoughts that you've had, but the old reflexive responses, the complexes have governed in their typical way and created, again, surprise, the same old, same old. And that's one of the places to begin. So if one's not in conversation with a therapist whose purpose is in part to stand outside of us and look to see those patterns, then we realize, oh, well, I have to become more aware of this stimulus response patterning process within myself, and then be willing to take it on in some way. What's going to happen if you don't do it that way, you see? And often what one feels is a kind of shudder of fear that says, in a sense, oh, but you can't do that. That's one of those archaic voices we all have in our heads. And they conduct a kind of tyranny over the free expression of the individual's personality.
You talk about how these unconscious voices can keep us repeating patterns, but how doing this work begins to open up more possibility in our lives. And I'm reminded of that Viktor Frankl quote: between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
That's quite appropriate. The only problem is the gap there, that in between, is sometimes a millisecond. That's why so often we respond reflexively.
And that's why I think about this kind of inner work, shadow work, and bringing awareness to the unconscious as a way of opening that space. So we're less reactive and we have more choice about how we respond.
Absolutely. That's why one can step outside and look at those patterns and say, no, what was that in service to inside of me when I set that in motion? Or why these outcomes? How is that serving something in me, some old idea? And again, it may be an unconscious idea. So, how do we make it conscious? Well, one of the ways is start looking at those patterns. They are the outer expression available to consciousness, which allows us to see these invisible agencies at work within each of us. Most folks do not have a sense of deep permission to own their own journey. And I'm talking about the difference between an adaptive life and an authentic life, which is really yours and chosen by you and enacted by, so to speak, the best parts within you.
You write that destiny is seeking to unfold through us. That's such a powerful idea. What does it mean to you to keep our appointment with destiny?
Well, the ancients understood these two force fields of energy running through history and through each of us as individuals. One was fate. These are the definitions and limitations. You didn't choose your family, the time and culture you were born into. You didn't choose a lot of determining and limiting factors and directive factors. But something nonetheless is seeking its expression through you. And right in the middle of those two force fields is the human being. That's where consciousness can tilt the balance a little bit. If we pay attention to the promptings of the inner life, which is not navel gazing, it's really paying attention to the directives that are healthiest for you in the long run. Then you realize you're attending a different kind of agenda than that which is set out for you by your culture. When you do that, and if it's right for you, there will be ample sense of that purposefulness and meaning that floods you in a way.
And in order to do that, as you say, we have to be willing to joyfully be defeated by ever greater things.
Yeah, that's a great line from Rilke.
Hmm.
My youthful ego is saying, "What's this defeat business? I want to win a few things, right?" But to be defeated by ever larger things means you're growing, you're developing. Ask larger questions, that are worthy of your life struggle. It's not about just how do I become content. It's rather what is wanting engagement in my life? What is asking for growth and development in me? And that may be intimidating, but so what? It's intimidating to have had a life that wasn't yours, that didn't make sense to you along the way. And sadly, that's the story of so many folks' lives.
Very true. One of the questions that you ask in the book, and that I heard in one of your Sound True interviews, is what is wanting expression through you? And that has been whispering in my ear for years, ever since I heard it. So I wanted to thank you for that because it has supported so much of the work that I've done in the last several years and so much of the unfolding in my own life of becoming who I really am. And this question points to that idea that there is this kind of autonomous voice within us, a deeper wisdom beneath our conditioning that seems to know what we're here for and that wants to guide us towards it. Could you speak to that for us a little bit?
So in time, you realize having done the right thing. In other words, we are exposed to expectations of others. What do my parents want from me? What does the school teacher want from me? What do my playmates ask of me? What does the system ask of me? And that's part of engaging with the reality that we're thrust into on the one hand, but on the other hand, it always tends to coagulate the authority again as external. What do I need to do to fit in and avoid stress and so forth? And that's what becomes the operative sense of self in the first half of life. And so that things usually have to hurt enough or cause enough internal distress for us to begin to address that. And over time, we have to realize, nature equips us with primal value systems. The first and simplest is the feeling function. What are feelings? Feelings are things I don't create. Feelings happen autonomously as a result of our psyche's analysis of how things are going for you. You can do all the things you're supposed to do, but it doesn't feel right. Or the feelings of enthusiasm are not there. When you're doing what's right for you, the energy's with you. When you're in conflict with yourself, even if you identify with what you're trying to accomplish, the feeling function doesn't support that. So over time, paying attention to feelings is one way to discern what is working for us and what is not. Secondly, is energy systems. We can mobilize energy, and we need to be able to do so. At the same time, if you keep doing the things that are wrong for you, it leads to burnout, distress, self medication, as we all know. Thirdly, we have dreams. And dreams are autonomous evaluative responses to our life, as seen by the self, capital S, that in its own way is seeking to initiate a dialogue with us. Recently, I saw a sleep study, that indicated that if you reach 80 years old, and I'm 85, we will have spent 6 years of our life dreaming. Nature doesn't waste energy. And so it's obviously processing the stimuli and experiences of our life, but also has a point of view. And its point of view is crying out for respect, for dialogue. Fourthly, is this question of meaning. If what you're doing is meaningful for you, you can put up with the stresses. You can plow through them because the reward, that sense of the rightness of that, is confirmed by your own psyche. And lastly is psychopathology, ironically. If I get off track from what I should be doing with my life, my psyche shows up, whether it's disturbing dreams or depression or anxiety or whatever it is. The psyche will pathologize. And the word pathos from the Greek means suffering. So that means the psychopathology literally means the expression of the suffering of the soul. So you see why we wouldn't want to repress that. We'd rather say, all right, what is it trying to tell me? What kind of corrective is my own psyche asking of me? So to back up to your question, in the first half of life, we're trying to build enough ego strength to leave home, go out into the world, and deal with what the world wants of us. But if you do only that the rest of your life, you become just a creature of your environment, an adaptive creature. But there's something in you that is wanting expression through you. That has very little to do with your ego desires. It has to do with what wishes to express itself in the world. Now, that could be anything from, your innate sexuality to your emotional gifts to your outer professional gifts. So the second half of life is about the recovery of personal authority, the attainment, if need be, of permission to actually have your life and not someone else's. Our job is not to fit in, but to be a vehicle for a greater life expression. And thirdly, to ask the question, what wants expression through me? And that's something that we don't create. We are summoned to. That's vocation, vocatus, vocal, to be called. That's a calling. Your calling ultimately is not a job. Your calling is to become a fuller human being, a more authentic person.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I wanted to shift to talking about calling and vocation because you talk about it in the book and I really appreciate that you make it clear that it's not always easy. And we might assume, oh, we're following our heart's call, we're living authentically, and that would be easy. But in fact, it's often quite challenging and it requires risk.
Absolutely. Well, and just to be autobiographical for a moment, I'm a card carrying introvert. So anything public is an effort for me. But we're having this conversation because a long time ago, I've devoted my life to education in the various venues in which it can occur. And this is one of them. And so it doesn't mean that this is an easy thing to do. Quite the contrary. I always feel stress and anxiety beforehand. But then afterwards, you feel, all right, but this was in service to something that really matters to you. And for that reason, guess what? When the opportunity comes again or the calling comes again, you'll do it again for the simple reason that that sense of purpose is not something that's replaced by distraction.
My father wrote a book called Life Journey in the Old Testament, and he wrote a whole chapter about callings in the Bible and how they're often refused at first because they are so difficult. But they're divine callings, so we have to answer the call ultimately.
Yeah, you call it the summons of the soul, if you will. The word soul is the literal translation of the Greek word psyche. So, psychotherapy means literally listening to or paying attention to the soul, which puts a different spin on it altogether. As I said, psychopathology means listening to the expression of the soul's suffering, you see. Once you begin to understand the deep roots of this sort of thing, then you realize, oh, this is soul work. This is really about that deep center within each of us that's purposeful and intentional, and of which we know so little, but it's operating at all times. And again, seeking its expression in the world through us.
In discovering Jungian psychology in your work, it's been so encouraging because of this idea that there really is this inner information that we carry, that we're born with, and that we can trust.
Mhm.
And so the path of unfolding for me has really become about learning to drop into that and to trust it. And I've always loved the metaphor of the acorn and the oak tree, that the acorn already contains everything it needs to become its fullest expression. That image helps me trust that there's something in me that already knows who I'm meant to become, and that it's just a matter of allowing it to unfold.
That's right.
When I began to realize that this deeper part of us is always trying to speak to us, especially through dreams, as you mentioned, it gave me such a sense of comfort to think that, I have this inner companion that's trying to knock on the door and get my attention. And so paying attention to that has become so rich and really kind of magical and mysterious because you start to see again and again, like you said, you can't believe it until you experience it. And when you do, you just know.
Yes, no, I fully agree. I want to underline what you just said. Ultimately, this has to be experiential. You can read about it, but you have to risk listening to the deepest expressions of your own soul. Emily Dickinson wrote an aphorism that I've often quoted, and that is, the sailor cannot see the north, but knows the needle can. And I think it was her intuitive awareness that one better find a compass within. If you have a compass within, then you can always find what is true north. But if you don't know what true north is, then you're not going to be able to guide your own life. You're going to be responding to the biggest noise in your environment or the biggest fear that is governing you from within. So, yes, this is experiential. And I can say to you in complete honesty, and I would say humility here, if I need to know what's right for me, I sort of put it in there and they get back to me. Now, who they are, I don't know. I call them at times the little people downstairs in the solar plexus. And in other words, what is right for me will come to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, or come in a dream, or while I'm driving down the highway and I'm not even thinking about whatever the subject may be. And suddenly then I have a sense of clarity. Well, of course I know that. It's often what you already knew you knew, but it comes to you with a different sense of personal authority. And that's how you track what is right for you.
This feels like the perfect opportunity to tell you about something I wanted to share with you. So, talking about inner guides, I often work with runes and I kind of use them as a way of eliciting information from my unconscious.
Hmm.
And to prepare for this conversation, I decided to do that because I was feeling a little nervous
Yes.
because I have so much admiration for you. And so I pulled a rune, and the rune I got was Tiwaz, which is a symbol for inner authority, alignment, and courage. And so then what I like to do is I'll do a kind of active imagination where I engage with the symbol.
Hmm.
And so I kind of allow myself to go into like a dreamlike state.
Hmm.
And I just let the symbol arise to me in a place. And the place that emerged was a little cottage. And when I went inside, there were two rocking chairs, and you were sitting in one. There was a fire in a fireplace. And I went and I sat in the other rocking chair next to you. And at first, you didn't make eye contact with me, and it was just totally silent. And as we were sitting there, I noticed that there was a dark door. And I opened the door, and inside was a staff and a lantern. which, as I'm sure you know, are the symbols of the hermit or the sage.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, these are his attributes. Why did these come to me? And as I turned around, you had gotten up out of your rocking chair and you were really friendly and warm and joyous. And you were holding a chalice and you gave it to me. You offered it to me. And so it was just this really warm and beautiful exchange. And it felt like a transmission and it felt like a reminder from my deeper self, to remember my inner authority and to receive what's offered and to trust myself, basically.
Well, that's a marvelous example. Thank you for sharing that. Because I would concur that, in a sense, in your closet are those symbols. And what is a symbol? A symbol is an image that points towards the mystery. It's not a content, it's not an idea, it points toward. And it's saying these are things. The lamp, of course, is that which brings light into the dark places. The staff is that which steadies you and defends you, and so forth. These are powerful images of not only insight, but a certain sense of personal empowerment. And you didn't invent that. You surrendered the ego to see what the psyche had to say about, well, what if you're too afraid to have the conversation? And then you've shut that down in your life, haven't you? Or I mentioned I'm an introvert. I always feel anxious before these things. It's a voice of childhood. I can label that, but I always show up too, right? And I imagine you do too. So that's where you push through the resistance and you step into that psycho-spiritual enlargement that is, moving into your own place. In other words, the ego could say, "Oh, I just created those images." Not really. The ego relaxed and allowed the images to emerge as a kind of waking dream, if you will. And if it hadn't been right for you, those images wouldn't have emerged. Now, not always are the images as empowering as the ones you've had. And even the ones that we would find troubling to ego consciousness are still useful to know about. They're in our closet too. So why don't we take them out and deal with them, you see? Deal with them as an adult, not the fearful child. You can't avoid being afraid. It's just one has to be able to find the courage to address what needs addressing in one's life. Jung said once in a letter, he said, this work consists of three parts, of which therapy or psychology can only help with the first part, which is to give us insight. But then he said, come the moral qualities of the individual. Second is courage, the courage to take hold of your own life. And thirdly, he said, is endurance, sticking it out over time. Insight, courage, endurance. When you do that, that's how change genuinely occurs. It's not like in the movies where you suddenly have an insight and everything's happy after that. It's like this issue is going to be there probably a good part of your life, if not the whole journey. But it doesn't have to dominate your life. You can outgrow it. In fact, Jung said we don't solve the old problems, but we can grow larger than they are. That's a big distinction, you see.
Well, I love that you started this conversation by talking about inner authority because that symbol had appeared to me and it did feel like such a message about that.
Hmm.
And like you said, sometimes it's not always the most pleasant things that you encounter, but I feel like it's something that I can trust that is showing me something about where I need to go in terms of my journey of self realization, basically.
Absolutely. That's why I would say of those images, these are things I would see that as insight and the capacity to enable you, to empower you with the staff. They are things you have to lay conscious hold of in your life and sort of take them into daily life, metaphorically. Because when you do that, you'll be operating out of a more authentic place within your psyche. But I also just want to repeat, there will also be some scary things in our closet. And it's important to get them out too, because you know how we can all have a kind of difficult time at 3 or 4 in the morning where we wake up to our fears and so forth. But by day, they dissolve a little bit and you realize, all right, I can address this. How would the adult that I am go about addressing these things? How now, in the face of these issues, over which perhaps I have no outer control, am I going to conduct my life? What resources am I going to bring to the table here? And that's where you move into your adult posture here, rather than simply the frightened child.
Well, I wanted to speak about the task of midlife.
Hmm.
As you talk about in the book, many people find themselves feeling unsettled in this period, like something isn't quite working anymore. And you've said that the call to a more meaningful life often begins here. What is the task of midlife from a Jungian perspective?
Well, first of all, when we say midlife, I want to say that's a very flexible term. And that's why I changed the term to middle passage. There's a passage that occurs. We know about the adolescent passage where we move from overt childhood into, ostensible adulthood. And the final passage is mortality, of course. But there is a point that often happens from the 30s onward where one's projections, for example, a young person understandably projects a personal agenda onto the future. Like, I want to find this satisfying career. I want to find this satisfying relationship. I might want to become a parent. I have to undertake citizenship roles, etc., etc. And they will A, make me happy, be fulfilling, C, be rewarding in various ways. And then you get to that point, you know, the marriage is in trouble, the children are acting out, you hate your job, or your psyche has withdrawn its approval and support of you, and you're in a depression. Those are signs that one has to go back to the drawing board. And one has to say, all right, why has the psyche withdrawn its support here? And what were my projections and expectations? Rather than blame somebody, I need to say, I'm the one who engaged and focused on these things. So and I'm just using round figures here. So at 40, two things have happened. One, you've lived those projections and have been forced to re examine them. And secondly, by now you have enough ego strength to be able to bear looking at it. And it's at that point that one begins to examine, what was I thinking when I did this or that? Or what was this choice in service to inside of me? Because at the time we didn't know what we were doing. A number of years ago, give you an example. I was invited to talk about intimate relationships. This was an honors college thing. So the first 90 minutes, we talked about the psychodynamics of relationship, of projection, transference, intrapsychic imagos, all that stuff. Then we took a little break, and then we came back, and I said, now let's look at your current or recent relationships. And the curtain came down. These very active students just were mute. Because they were all like late teens, early 20s. And it was like they couldn't bear to think that their current relationship needed analysis. They couldn't bear to think that, well, maybe the one that just blew up or the one that's just so disappointing, I've heaped all of my expectations onto this. In other words, they couldn't get that kind of distance. And so I remember thinking that's one reason why I gave up years ago college teaching and moved into what I'll call adult education. You see, like, I'll see you when you're 40. Then you'll have enough ego strength and enough life experience to have something to truly reflect upon. When the younger you are, the more you're sort of caught up still in those projections. And projections are not bad, it's just projections are our psyche's effort to try to make sense of unknown territory by bringing to it what we think we know about it, when in fact we don't know very much about the person or the situation. And life will have its own tutorial for us, that's for sure.
That reminds me of the Jung quote where he says the first half of life is about establishing a healthy ego, while the second half is about letting go of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
In other words, what does the world want of me in the first half? And can I mobilize enough energy to meet its expectations in a constructive way? But secondly, then what does the soul want of me? Which is maybe relinquishment of a lot of the agendas of that first half. For example, when I was in midlife, I left tenured position in academia, which was highly sought after and I liked, but I also realized the kind of conversation I could have in the analytic setting went far deeper than was happening in the classroom. So I made that choice to leave one world for a deepened conversation. And as a young person, I would never imagined that I would be spending my life listening to people suffering. And yet today, I could say I can't imagine a more meaningful or more engaging way to spend my life's energy than working with people in therapy.
It's interesting to hear about that piece of your own midlife transformation. And in the book you also talk about, the empty nest experience of your daughter going away. And I love the way you frame that as okay, that was energy well spent for one part of my life. And of course there's sadness and that passing and that transition. But then what am I going to do with this energy now? Where am I going to put it in this next phase of my life?
Sure, sure. And when a projection sort of erodes or has even been completed, as that example, you can say, all right, now that energy's come back to me. What are you going to do with it? I actually, that's when I started writing books. I thought, the energy that went into raising children, and she wasn't the only child, now can go into something that you've neglected in your own life for other reasons. And part of that time was spent in retraining, of course, from moving from academia to psychotherapy. But the creative process goes on within us, and we're not meant to do a single thing for all of our lives. We're meant to grow and develop, and again follow where genuine curiosity, imagination, and courage is asking to take it. And when you do so, your life is far more fulfilling.
Yeah, I first heard you say that in the lecture series. And I was going through an experience at the time where my kids had gotten older and they were needing me less. And my mom had just passed away, and I'd spent the last part of her life helping my dad care for her. And it was just a wonderful thing to hear in that moment to say, okay, so where do I want to put this energy now? Where does this energy want to go?
I was just going to say, well, what we're engaging in right now is part of your creative process moved onward and developed in different ways. Exactly.
Yeah, and I love that you connect it to creativity. I've recently started a program called The Creative Return. And for me, when we're talking about all this, that's essentially what it's about. That vital life source that's wanting expression through us is ultimately creativity. It's a creative force, it's a natural expression of our desire to produce and
Sure.
to make meaning and create a life.
That's right. Well, yeah, and another way to ask the question is what engages your spirit? And if the answer is I don't know, well then that's your agenda. You better start paying attention. What engages your spirit? And spirit is the life energy that is wishing engagement, wishing deepening, which is wishing expression. And when you serve it, it serves you.
Well, I know how much you like to cite poetry, and I wanted to share a poem that I love because when you were talking in the book about the dead shell of the previous life and the outgrown roles,
Hmm.
I thought about John O'Donohue's poem, A Morning Offering, which I often share with my clients. And in it, he expresses a longing to break the dead shell of yesterdays and to risk being disturbed and changed.
Hmm.
And he actually says, may my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers. And I love that image of the invisible geography, that something beneath the surface is already pulling us forward, even when we feel lost.
Yes. No, absolutely. There's a purposefulness in the human psyche that, if we can align ourselves with it, it produces this sense of meaning and purpose. And if we run from it or have been separated from it, it will pathologize, as I said, and will be tending to a lifetime of symptoms of one kind or another. So it's an invitation to deepening, and frankly, I think is the richest time of one's life, actually.
I've really found that to be true. I felt inspired into that through Jungian psychology and encountering work by people like yourself. And now it brings me so much joy to share that message with people who might be in a phase where they kind of feel my life is over, they're feeling regret about the things they never did, to be able to say, no way. This is the richest period of your life. There's so much opportunity here for really living as you truly are.
Hmm. Absolutely, sure. And I mentioned at my advanced age, I consider this the richest time of my life. I love being a young parent, for example, and I love developing a professional life in the first half of life. But you know yourself better now than any other time in your life. You know what works, what doesn't work. You have a greater sense of personal authority. And you also have a deep sense of what matters in your life, what's worthy of your service, what's worthy of your investment of energy, and what is not. So, as the days tick down here, I'm very much aware of this as saying, all right, this is a very meaningful experience. And how are you going to sustain this? How are you going to enhance it? The journey is far from over. As long as you're curious, as long as you pay attention to the promptings of the spirit, life's going to serve you, but you have to serve it in return.
Yes, absolutely. The final stanza of that John O'Donohue poem echoes what I think so many of us feel at midlife and the invitation that I hear in your work. He says, "May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more."
Yes, that's well said.
Well, thank you again for being with me here today. This has been such a rich and meaningful conversation. Your work has been such a support to so many, and I'm really grateful for your wisdom and your presence.
No, thank you. It's been a privilege to be with you today. I wish you well.
This has been The Deepening with Suzanne Larue. If you enjoy conversations that lead you deeper into self and soul, I hope you'll subscribe, follow, and tune in for future episodes. Thanks for joining us.